Jude Bywater, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. Welcome to delivering on climate change, our collective challenge. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. With me today, I have Zarina Ahmad, who's co-director of the Women's Environmental Network. Zarina is an expert in equalities and climate change, increasing participation of underrepresented groups in environmentalism. She was named as one of the top 30 influential women contributing to the environment and sustainability by BBC Women's Hour. Zarina has previously worked at the Council for Ethnic Minority Voluntary Organisations, leading the charge for increasing participation in environmentalism in Scotland. Since being told that ethnic minorities aren't interested in climate change, Zarina has dedicated herself to creating pathways for underrepresented groups to work in environmental organisations, increasing not only a diversity of people, but a diversity of ideas by providing training and creating learning spaces. It's fantastic to have Zarina here. There's so much more I could say. She was honoured in 2022 with the Emma Goldman Snowball Award for innovative achievements in feminism and inequality research. Zarina is a feminist activist against climate change and for equal rights for ethnic minorities. In her work, she promotes the inclusion of women belonging to ethnic minorities in solutions to climate change. So I can't wait to talk about all of those solutions and all of that work. Welcome to Zarina.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for having me on. And I loved your introduction about, just creating a space for everyday people to talk about climate action. So I just love that introduction as well.
Let's move to you and focus on you, because this is what this is all about, as well as talking all things climate. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and what inspires you to take this path? You've been described, as I say, as a feminist activist against climate change, and you're pushing for the inclusion of women belonging to ethnic minority in solutions on climate change. Why this, and what inspires you to make a difference to the world?
I suppose it was my own positionality and my own passion. So as a child, I've always been an environmentalist. I went through a midlife assessment. It wasn't a crisis. I turned it around to make it a bit more positive. So it was an assessment, and looked at my life and thought, well, where is it going? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Questioning all these things that you do about yourself. And at that stage, I wasn't following the path that I was passionate about, or I wasn't making a difference in the world in any way whatsoever. So it was like, well, let's go back to the core values that I had and what I believed in, and then started pursuing a career along those paths. And that led me to work in the environmental sector. And then when I was working in the environmental sector, I came across a little bit of racism. I wouldn't say a lot of racism, but enough racism to start me questioning, again, the world that we were living in. Because I had been brought up in the 70s when racism was very overt. And then the world that my children were living in, I thought was worlds apart. I thought racism didn't exist anymore. I thought we lived in zero tolerance. And then certain issues were coming up in their lives, certain issues were coming up in my life. And I'm thinking, actually, racism is still alive and kicking here. That led me to then thinking about the environmental sector as a whole, and also how significantly, and this is going back 15 years ago, how significantly white middle class it was. And I'm saying 15 years ago because I'm still hearing this from other people working in the sector. The same narrative is still going on that, the environmental sector is still white and middle class, and predominantly male. People with influential power are still very male. So that was how I ended up looking at racial justice within the environmental sector. And then while I was working in that sector, then it was just this continuous frustration and toil that I was seeing with women that were working in the sector. Women were carrying all the burden of doing all the work, yet when it came to decision-making spaces, they were so underrepresented. I mean, we just look at the representation of women at COP, the biggest climate conference in the world, where governments and world leaders come together, yet that representation of women change makers is so small. So and on the ground you see that all the change makers, and I emphasize all because I might be over exaggerating there, but majority, of change makers in civil society tend to be women. They are the ones that are resilient. They are the ones that come up with solutions. They are the ones that are faced with making sure that their families' lives are not being impacted by climate. For me, it was just like, well, where are we? We're always missing when it comes to like decision-making spaces. And then thinking about like gender, race, my own positionality, then led me to like working more about intersectionalities that we all hold. And again, we're not boxed up into like specific identities. We hold multiple identities and we're impacted by those multiple identities. But we also have influence in having those multiple identities. So that's kind of like my journey in a nutshell.
Your journey, and that's your inspiration. So you've been able to combine everything you feel very passionate about. And it's interesting you talking about you got to a point where you felt, what difference are you making? And you've certainly made a huge difference in the last many years, actually. But I want to talk a little bit more about that intersectional kind of feminist approach. But climate change is undoubtedly on our doorstep. We're talking environment, but we're seeing it every day, aren't we? On the news, or what's happening to our climate, things are warming up. And you've talked about the disconnect with our planet. You've talked about that we're not connected as we should be. So could you tell us a little bit about the work of the Women's Environment Network? What does it mean? Can you explain in simple terms, what does it actually mean to take an intersectional feminist approach to tackling climate and the nature emergencies that we're seeing?
Right, to start off with, so the Women's Environmental Network began a long time ago. So was set up and founded in 1988. And at that time, it was set up by feminists who were really passionate about the environment. So it's about protecting the environment and what we needed to do to protect the environment. That conversation has now moved to thinking about like the intersectionality, like you've pointed out. So it's like intersectionality of like different social justices. So in that protecting of the environment, we cannot ignore that there are people that live in poverty. We cannot ignore the fact that people that have been marginalized or racialized have been done at the expense of protecting the environment, or vice versa. We're in this situation where we've exploited the earth for its resources, but we've also done that at the expense of people and land, and people's land as well. So that whole connecting up the dots is, I suppose, what we really classify as being intersectional. So it's thinking about it in terms of like intersectionality of people's identities, but planet and those that live on the planet. So it doesn't just have to be, like plants and trees and things like that, but also the animal life that occupies that planet. So it's thinking about it in a much more holistic way. And it's very easy for us to focus on one issue. And I think sometimes when we focus on one issue, we can cause harm to other social justice issues. And that's what we have to be careful of. Probably where the work of the Women's Environmental Network is now has moved over the years, to make sure that if we're like thinking about the environment, we're not causing harm to other social justice issues, or bringing them in and acknowledging the fact that those social justice issues are also being impacted by the same things like extraction and exploitation, which causes harm to the planet, but it's also causing harm to people.
And of course, when you talk about specifically about women and you talk about that social injustice, women tend to be the ones, the people who are impacted most, because although as you mentioned, we are the consumers, women are making the decisions. Women are also responsible largely in all parts of the world for keeping their families safe generally, keeping people fed, keeping us all fed in actual fact, and being the producers of the world. And yet women in this climate story that we're talking about do tend to be disproportionately affected, don't they?
We don't even have to go globally, we can look locally. So things like a lot of women work in the care sector. So the care sector tends to be a sector that doesn't have a high like carbon emissions impact, but yet the care sector isn't valued as a green jobs. Also, the care sector can be also undervalued, underpaid, invisibilized, and yet the women are majority working in the care sector. So it's like thinking about the roles that women provide in society and how those roles can be more valued. It's acknowledging the roles of like what women play, but also how we are resilient. Because just thinking about COVID, you know, if we didn't have all the women that worked in those care sectors, whether within hospitality, food, like hospitals, healthcare, you know, we were the backbone that held us all together in COVID. So it's just like, so just thinking about like, yeah, that emergency, that urgency and who holds that space is really important.
So that backbone that you speak about, because you've just also mentioned COP and the women at the table. And I know that you've also quoted a figure that says 80% of women are displaced by climate. So that there aren't enough women at the top table, and there isn't enough diversity of women at that top table. But so how are you tackling that? We've identified the problem, we're talking about it, but the Women's Environmental Network, how are you actually making a difference to that top table?
One of the projects that I would say that really is moving towards getting more representation of women's voices is our Climate Sisters project. So the Climate Sisters project started as a pilot project in COP26 in Glasgow. And it was very much about trying to create a platform for women who would not see themselves as being climate experts, climate activists, political activists in any way whatsoever. Far removed from having a seat at that table, not only being perceived by others not having a seat at that table, but also by themselves and thinking that it's not their space. So I suppose the Climate Sisters project was very much to do that, to take that role. The starting point is having conversations, having dialogues with groups of women that are racialized, marginalized, and not just women, but communities that are feeling the same way, and bringing them to the space that we've created where they share knowledge, because we all hold a lot of knowledge, and whether that knowledge comes from lived experience, comes from our cultures, comes from our ancestors. So there is this other knowledge that we tend to disregard and not value. So I suppose it's bringing that knowledge to the forefront, complementing it with that climate jargon, climate science, and then empowering them to feel as if they do have a voice. You know, there are spaces for them to take, whether that is at their local PTA groups, or whether that is at their local council, or whether that is in bigger political spaces. So it's trying to create that movement to make sure that that there is a pathway for these voices to be heard.
And that Climate Sisters project that you speak about has really captured the imagination, hasn't it? There's a lot of communication going on between groups around the country. It
certainly has. It's grown arms and legs from being a cohort of 12 people that were in Glasgow to now being a huge movement right across the UK. It started off in Glasgow, then we had a group in Manchester. Again, it was about 20 women in Manchester. And then we got funding for a 3-year project in London, and that's like involving over 200 women in London. And we've now got funded to go back to Manchester and Scotland for another 5-year project. So now that we've got these Climate Sisters, it's like we're trying to create power and movement behind them.
Have you just received that funding? Is that new? Is that relatively new?
So the Climate Action Fund from the National Lottery is relatively new, So we're just in the process of setting up those projects now in the Northwest and up in Scotland.
How does somebody like you address the people who express some cynicism around climate change, and particularly around what you're trying to do? Because we know the planet is warming. There are people who would like to perhaps say that's not exactly what is happening. How do you go to work every day and know that there's that narrative going on as well? And do you think we're losing the message around net zero, or should we just change it?
Okay, so there's two parts to that. So dealing with the people that are cynicists, I would say even my family, I would have put them into that space. Like my brother was an economist who believed that the capitalist system works and had a place. But over the years, maybe it's just the drip conversations that we've been having. He is a total environmentalist now, and is like totally capitalist. Is failing us, it's not working, we need a new economic system, So it's great to see that change that happens over time. And I think one of the things that I do is I step back from preaching and not telling. I actually just open up conversations and create space for them to be able to hear their voices and for them to reflect back on what they think. And question, and just to be able to question themselves and say, well, is that really the case? Can we really say that the world is not heating up yet? We know that the temperatures are 42 degrees, or questioning it. I suppose it's questioning their thoughts as well, rather than preaching to them. It's probably the approach that I've taken over the years. It's always like having those open dialogues. So like giving space for their opinions to be valued as well. So for instance, like, when people talk about like electric vehicles, are they the solution? And my question will be, well, are they the solution? Maybe they're not the solution. Let's talk about it. So it's like having those conversations, because I could also equally be wrong. My thoughts could be wrong. What I think might be right may be right for me, but may not be right for somebody else. So I think it's like respecting that space with people that are cynical and letting them question themselves and their views as well. And then the second part of that was net zero, the net zero agenda. I have issues around terminology like net zero. So net zero, who is net zero for? Who sets the net zero agenda? Like, for me, if I wasn't working in this space and someone said net zero to me, I would have no clue what that means. I would have no idea how it has an impact on my life, or how I could have an impact on net zero agenda or targets. So I just really struggle with these terminologies that are branded right across civil societies, if civil society should know what it means and also should be able to input into it when they have very little influence to actually make a difference. Because the net zero agendas are set by government. It's a way for governments to measure their targets, or governments with industry. And yes, civil society needs to be included in that. But is that what civil society has influence over? There is very little influence that they can have over that. It's really about choices that they can make, right? And sometimes those choices are very restricted. So if we want to reduce plastic, but yet in our shops, everything's covered in plastic, sometimes it's really difficult to make the choices that you want to make. So I just think these terminologies like net zero, because I've been working in the sector for a long time, these terminologies and jargon terms change, because it can be low carbon, it can be, carbon zero, net zero. All of these terminologies are set by government. So for everyday layperson, it means nothing. But what does mean something to people is, how do we live in a planet, or how could we improve our lives? How can our lives and the lives of the planet be more sustainable, be more fair, be more healthy? It's a different language that we need to be using.
Language has got a big part to play, hasn't it? And how
language has a huge part. Language, and I think the other thing is emotion. Mm-hmm. When we think about net zero, that's not emotive in any way whatsoever. And change happens from an emotional place.
So it's making people care and feel it and understand why it matters, and it has to come from the heart. So we're tackling huge issues, but you seem to be incredibly positive. You're very can-do. I suppose you've got to be. Do you feel hopeful for a cleaner future, healthier future for our planet?
I am always a can-do person. You're right. I am a can-do person. There's always a solution, right? I always feel that there is a solution. The bigger picture, I always do think, well, if we've caused this problem, we can find a solution to it. So whoever the we is in that bubble, if we're causing the issues, we can also find a solution. Also, we can step back from causing the issues. So if we're causing something and we can see that it's having a negative impact, let's just stop doing it and let's just step back. So for me, that's where the can-do attitude comes. It comes from a very simplified mindset. But
do you think in terms of all of that positivity that you have and looking for those solutions, and I'm sorry to interrupt there, but do you think business, do you think government, do you think they're listening?
No, I don't. That's where my butt was coming in. No, I don't think they're listening. And I think they are listening. They know what to do. They're refusing to do it. They're refusing to do it simply because, and I'm going to be very open about this, simply because profit rules over everything else. We look at our government right now and it's all about profit. And for me, politicians and a government is about serving your people. And I do not see that at all. And for me, all I see is pound signs, dollar signs, wherever we are. And for me, that is where the problem lies.
Yeah, and you're very much driven at grassroots. You're driven, but you believe the change can come from it. The decisions are made up top, but the change is driven from the bottom, isn't it? That's where things will happen.
I don't think it's one or the other. It doesn't matter how much drive and passion you have at grassroots level. If the systems are not there for you to make that change, or the systems are pushing back on you, it's very, very difficult. We need the systems to change. We need the institutions to change. We need the political willingness to change. We need all of it. It can't be one or the other.
So we need all of it, and we all need to come together, and we need to keep people at the table. And you need to presumably keep striving to get the right people at the table, and a much more diverse mix of people, obviously, because that's what we all want to see, and build a healthier planet and a healthier future for your children, for generations to come. Tell us what next for you, and what next for the Women's Environmental Network, because you've obviously achieved a significant amount so far. What's coming next? What can we look out for in terms of your work and in terms of your own personal career development?
I suppose for us at the Women's Environmental Network is we are moving away from just being like London-centric and just like having a bit more presence nationally. And with that presence nationally, it's really about linking up and collaborating with other organisations, especially women's organisations who might not be doing environmental work or might be doing some environmental work but don't see themselves as an environmental organisation. And it's like linking and partnering them up so that we are, I suppose, as a movement, stronger and hold more voice and hold more power. So for us as Women's Environmental Network, that's the direction that we're like going in. We have many projects that we're looking at, so especially around toxic chemicals, thinking about all the toxic chemicals that are now in our system, whether it's from like the plastics, whether it's in our food system, whether it's in our beauty products. So thinking about like the toxic chemicals that are like infiltrating our lives and how that has an impact on our health and on the planet. And
for you, Zarina, for you?
Sorry?
For you though, for your career, what are you going to be doing?
This is so bad because I don't actually feel as if I ever have a direction. If the door slightly opens, I push that door open and then I hold the door open for others to come through. So if I see an opportunity, it's like, let's go this way. And the more people I can take with me, the more confident I feel.
Fantastic. And that is driven from, and we started with when you were talking about making a difference and getting to that point in your life where you felt you wanted to do more and make a really a difference for all of us. And I love that idea of pushing that door open. And I thank you very much for coming to the podcast today and talking about projects like the Climate Sisters Project, but also talking about and letting us have some of that passion and drive, because we all need some of that to be able to make a difference and make a better world. So we all need a little bit of that. So thank you so much for bringing that in. And just reminding us to push that door and open it for all of the others. But thank you for your time, Zarina. It's superb to have you as a guest. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts effects of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Thank you very much to Zarina Ahmad for being such a wonderful guest on the Decarbonisation Dialogue. Thank you, Zarina.
Thank you.
I'm Milo. I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.